You're listening to The Solution, a podcast by Growers Mineral. I'm your host, Russell Bobel. In this ongoing series, we will be taking a look at the book More Food from Soil Science, a book written in 1965 by one of Growers' co-founders, Dr. V.A. Tietjens.
Chapter 13, Soil and Plant Tests May Be Useful in Increasing Yields. Every soil and plant research worker has the ambition to have enough data and enough observations to perfect a soil test and a plant foliage test, able to recommend the exact amount of plant food material to grow the maximum yield. This is a big order. From my 30 years of experience and consideration of soil and plant tests, I am ready to approach the problem with the utmost humility, knowing that I have an insurmountable obstacle before me. I have used soil tests for many years and plant tests at spasmodic intervals. As a result of experience in using these tests on field crops, I have gradually soft-pedaled many of them because I could see no correlation between my tests and field results. The purpose of the soil test is to find out why a given soil does not respond to the application of those nutrients which the soil test shows are needed. If we consider the complexity of the media we are working with, we will see that there is a reason why the soil test is not always reliable. A pure sand culture, if properly supplied with nutrients necessary to a good crop, will, when tested with a quick soil test, show a good test for calcium, manganese, nitrate, and ammonia, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and various trace elements. If, unbeknownst to the tester, we leave out one of those, he can find which one it is, and if he applies it, the plant will grow normally. It's a simple matter to correlate the results of the test with the growth response. In other words, the tests are accurate. The technique is satisfactory. We do seem to have the available testing equipment, and when a person asks me whether a given tester on the market is good, I must say it is a good tester. There are many conditions where we find the tester useless because the results do not correlate with the resulting crop response. What then is the problem? We have had many scientists study soil testers, trying to adapt them to certain soil types, but so far I have been very much disappointed. I feel that the wrong people are working in the wrong places. The scientist who should be working on the perfection of the soil tester is the one who knows the chemical and physical changes that takes place in the soil. The man with little knowledge of soil chemistry probably will never contribute much to the perfection of the soil tester, nor even to the perfection of the plant foliar tester, if such a thing is possible. We have tremendous changes taking place and different conditions prevailing in the many soil types, yet we are trying to adapt a soil tester to work for all of them. Every soil has rather large quantities of minerals, and some have increasing amounts of organic matter. As such, they may have little value to our growing crop because the nutrients are not in a form capable of being taken into the plant. The sandy soil may be made up largely of quartz. To this quartz may be added more minerals, which eventually may supply some or many of the necessary nutrients in variant qualities. So far, these nutrients are not in water-soluble form and may not be extracted from the sand with distilled water. They may be broken down later and may eventually be made available. Until we begin to reduce or oxidize some of the iron and aluminum materials to a chemically active form, we have a more or less inert material as far as the plant is concerned. To be available to the plant, they must be extractable from the sand by distilled water. The strongest means the plant has to make the nutrients available from these minerals is carbon dioxide, which becomes carbonic acid, a weak agent but effective if time is not a factor. But usually the process by itself is not fast enough to make the bound nutrients available so that the plant can make a satisfactory growth. A good sod test consists of an extracting solution strong enough to take out or release the available nutrients used by the plant in a given soil. The tests are then made on the filtered solution. A big problem is to find an extractant that will remove what is available to the plant and not remove that portion which is held too firmly for the plant to extract. In the sandy sod mentioned, distilled water would be a good extractant, and in most soils, distilled water will remove some of the nutrients used by the plant. So far, we have been dealing in simple chemistry, and a knowledge of elementary chemistry might suffice. But when we consider the other 99% of the soils in which our crops grow, we deal with colloidal and organic chemistry reactions, which complicate our problem very much. If we mix sand, certain necessary minerals, and a small amount of organic matter, we gradually form, with the help of carbonic acid from the roots of a plant, a combination of quartz, iron oxide, and aluminum oxide, which, because they are chemically active, begin to act as a colloid with negative charges, which are ready to combine with positive ions. Then, if we add some limestone, a base exchange system forms and begins to control the mechanism of exchange between the charges on the active colloidal system in the base exchange system and the charges on the roots of plants, which get their charges from the protein system in the protoplasm of the root cells. Thus, we have established a strong base exchange complex in a sod, which may be largely chemically active colloidally fine clay, or we can have the protein-clay combinations, or a colloidal protein system in the root cells, which also possesses base exchange properties which are probably weaker than those charges in the base exchange complex. We can say the same tilings about most of our food crops. Somebody classified all plants according to their lime requirements, and our gullible crops research men swallowed the bait without batting an eye. Had he assumed that these lists were based on tolerance to toxic conditions in the soil, and had we considered the calcium needs of the crop and soil, we would have made much more progress. As it is, we still don't realize that the chemical and physical condition of the soil must be given first consideration in any program of crop production. We neglected to keep our soils supplied with calcium, and now we suddenly realize that what we have taken out of the soil we must replace. This means we must apply large quantities of limestone. As a result, we are in a muddle, arguing about things about which few of us have sufficient knowledge. If we were alert, observing, and open-minded, we could learn much through experience. A great teacher, Agassiz, once said, "Study nature, not books. Don't shackle your mind by what someone has said unless you are wise enough to know wisdom when you see it." I once met my freshman chemistry teacher on the street as we were going to his lecture. He told me virtually the same thing. "This is a wonderful university and we have fine libraries. Take advantage of them. Don't depend on just what you hear in class." A soil is an active chemical compound which must be in balance with the growing plant. Any chemically active material sets up electric charges. The more clay and organic matter present, the more charges a given square foot will contain. A growing plant likewise has electrical charges in its protoplasm. A growing plant, in other words, if the soil is neutral, there is little interference with free ions moving from the soil solution to the root where charges are waiting to be satisfied. The root can also repel the entrance of the ions into its cell if it has its charges neutralized. Any living thing in the soil which depends on osmosis for its nutrition undoubtedly is affected by these same laws. The complexity of all the processes going on in the soil and their effects on plants is staggering. How can we possibly grow a good crop on the soil if we know almost nothing about it? And yet our crop research has continued for 75 or more years, with very little understanding of what is happening around the roots. And soil tests are supposed to rehabilitate the agricultural industry. The term fertility, as used now, is too confining and has led us down a narrow alley. It has been a boom to the fertilizer companies. The word fertility to me means the correct balance between all the forces contributing to producing a maximum yield under a given set of climatic conditions. If, for instance, I can raise the yield of corn from 50 to 103 bushels by squirting oxygen gas around the roots of the corn, as I did at the Olena farm in 1960 when corn became very yellow early in its growth, well, I feel that I have provided the plant with something it needed. In other words, oxygen had a beneficial effect and should be considered a contributor to the fertility level, just as we consider nitrogen and phosphorus. We need an oxygen tester, for if oxygen contributes to yield increases, it becomes part of the fertility picture. The big question is, do we understand our soils well enough to know why oxygen increased the yield? Roots need oxygen, true, but why didn't the soil provide it? It is one of the things that contributes to the high yield on some soils and not on others, while all of them may have equal amounts of plant food materials. Lime promotes high yields. Why? We have very few of the answers. How have we changed the soil? Is the drainage of water from that soil more rapid? Have we improved aeration? Have we detoxified something? We certainly have changed the chemical condition, but because we added calcium and magnesium. But have we changed the structure? Have we released plant food? There are hundreds of things that could have been changed. How much do we know about the clay and organic matter? I will agree that it is easier to grow a good plant on sand than on clay soil, not because sand is better, but because we know more about pure sand than we do about clay soil. Sand lends itself to more misuse and bad cultural treatments. It has fewer things that can go wrong. It warms up faster. Water penetrates faster and carries oxygen into the soil with it. There are fewer electrical charges to be neutralized. When a youngster, I made mud balls and mud pies. Certain things happened which I still remember and which tell me much about a sod. The kind of soil determines which kind of mud balls you can make. Perhaps it would help if many of our farmers were to add limestone to some of their soils, make mud balls, and see what it does to the soil. This reminds me of a country agriculture agent, a good friend of mine, who always carried a pack of blue litmus paper in his pocket. If we were in a field, he would pick up a handful of soil and make a firm ball of it. Carefully, he would place the ball in his pocket and, after 10 minutes or more, break it open, lay a piece of litmus paper between the two halves, press them together, and again put the ball in his pocket. When we had returned to the barn, he would take the balls out of his pocket, break them, and examine the litmus paper to see how much limestone was needed. I commented on his mud balls. He said, "I learned that in high school. You know that you can learn a lot about a soil if you make mud balls with it. You see, this soil is a good loam soil. It isn't sticky. When I broke open the ball, I noticed that it was crumbly. If you smell these balls when you break them open, they can tell you a good deal. This one has a nice, clean, earthy odor. That indicates a well-aerated soil. Sometimes when you first break mud balls open, they smell like a cesspool. When that happens, you had better check on drainage." I thought that I was the only one who had respect for mud balls. I didn't tell him that I, too, had studied mud balls. There are many things you can find out about a sod in the field without taking samples to a laboratory. I feel sometimes that I can make good recommendations in the field without a sod test, but a sod test does give one more assurance. There is a very serious problem in some of our sandy loam and silt loam sods, which indirectly is associated with lime deficiency. As the clay portion of these soils becomes deficient in calcium, the particles tend to hold more water in chemical combination. This tends to make the chemically active clay slippery, so that it actually shifts from the surface layers to the layers below, or collects at the plow depth, because this portion of the soil is not disturbed in our farming operations. Over the years, with no lime added to the soil, this layer, where clay is impregnated into the silt and gravel, becomes 2 to 4 inches thick. It becomes very acid, which prevents roots from penetrating. It often becomes so dense that it prevents water from moving up or down and nutrients from moving to the surface. It is referred to as plow soil. Every time the ground is plowed, the plow slides over this layer and tends to seal it, just as a mason's trowel seals the surface of concrete. When it is wet, it becomes putty-like, and when it is dry, it bakes to the hardness of a brick. When it is dry, the plow won't penetrate it. When it is wet, the plow will bring some to the surface. Farmers will tell you that if you turn very much of this yellow clay up to the surface, you will sterilize the soil. It is very acid, and unless it is thoroughly mixed with the other soil, seed down in it won't germinate. However, if 2 or 3 tons of limestone is applied after plowing and mixed in with a spring-tooth harrow, this clay becomes saturated with calcium and will tend to increase the yielding capacity of that sod. If you tested the plowed layer, you may find a test indicating a very fertile soil, and you may not harvest 30 bushels of corn from the sod. Sods having these plow soils will produce fairly good yields if moisture is ample. All the roots are located in the surface soil, and since moisture can't move to the surface, the only moisture available to the crop must come from rain. Plants grown on such soils will wilt during hot days and will burn up in dry spells. Trees, shrubs, long grasses will not do well. They have shallow roots. Some scientists have classified plants according to the depth of rooting. It doesn't make sense to me. All plants will root deep if they have a chance. The need for irrigation becomes urgent on such soils, and it is apparent that irrigation equipment can be justified. Many of our vegetable crops along the eastern seaboard are grown on such soils, and irrigation equipment is very much in evidence. Without water, crops are not good on such soils. A simple solution is to plow under large quantities of pulverized limestone and mix some with the soil on top. If enough limestone is applied, the correction will take place in a year. A subsoiler will speed up the action. As soon as the limestone begins to penetrate the plow soil, roots from the crop plants and weeds will begin to penetrate and will gradually make the plow soil porous. If there is sufficient limestone present, the process of correction is fairly rapid and permanent. Pond holes or depressions in a field where water tends to stand after a heavy rain are caused by these plow soils. Water from surrounding areas picks up small amounts of clay over the years, and as it accumulates, it gradually drops its clay. This clay is usually unsaturated as far as calcium is concerned. This will settle down and virtually plug the soil. Some of these pond areas, when first rained, will not grow crops because the seed cannot germinate in a clay that is only partially saturated with calcium. I have corrected many of these pond holes, and in doing so, have greatly enhanced the value of the farm. My method of correcting these pond holes is to circle the ponds 4 to 5 times with a subsoiler which is set to penetrate 16 to 20 inches. This dries the pond because any water flowing toward the pond penetrates into the soil before it gets to the pond. After the soil in the pond is dry enough to handle, I spread 4 to 8 tons of limestone per acre over the bottom as well as the surrounding soil. Then I subsoil the field and pond area. This subsoiling should be done when the subsoil is dry, so that it shatters the soil rather than merely slicing it. Another advantage is the fact that loose, dry soil on the surface along with limestone will drop into the subsoiler furrow, carrying some limestone to the depth of the subsoiler furrow. On some occasions, I have mounted a fertilizer hopper on the top of the subsoiler and dropped pulverized limestone into the furrow. I had occasion to work with a grower in eastern Virginia who owns a farm in the Portsmouth-Coxville-Bladen soil area. These soils have a heavy black clay subsoil, through which water penetrates slowly. It was not over 12 feet above sea level and within a few miles of the Atlantic Ocean. The neighbors told me that this particular farm had been cultivated every year, but in 40 years that they knew it had never grown a profitable crop. We spread 6 to 8 tons of pulverized limestone on the surface and worked it into the soil, leaving a 10-inch surface layer of loose, friable soil. Then we mounted a distributor on a subsoiler so that we could drop limestone into the subsoil. The subsoiler was set to penetrate 22 inches. We calculated that we dropped 1.5 to 2 tons of limestone into the subsoil. Much of this topsoil was also dropped into the subsoil because it was so dry. The following spring, this field was planted to corn and produced over 100 bushels an acre. In this case, the problem was not a plow soil, but an unsaturated condition in a soil that had a very high lime requirement. Getting the limestone into these subsoiler furrows, which were crisscrossed 3 feet apart each way, helped the roots penetrate to the bottom of the subsoiler points. When a farmer thinks about expanding his yield, he immediately plans on adding more land. A few have found out that it is more economical to cultivate the farm below the one they have, the second 6 inches of land. It is amazing how many of our crops are being grown in 6 inches of soil. That is about as deep as roots may be found in the soil, and in most cases, the moisture the crop has to grow on is what is found in that 6 inches of soil. Some of our growers have found that by preparing the ground to a depth of 12 inches, they have doubled their yields with very little more cost than it took formerly. Much of our coastal plain land has been plowed shallow for so many years that it is difficult to plow deeper. I find the same true in much of the Mississippi Valley, where appreciable amounts of fertilizer have been used. Plowman's Folly says that you don't have to plow, and Stales further that clay turned up will ruin your soil. Both are lame excuses. The shortest path to the poorhouse that I know of for vegetable growers and general farmers is not to plow coastal plain soil in its present condition. The damage done by clay that is turned up by deeper plowing can easily be corrected with lime. Furthermore, shallow plowed land can be plowed deeper, but it takes more power, slows down operations, and in some cases, it may take special equipment. It is an easy way out. If liming material is plowed under year after year, the lime will sweeten the subsoil and gradually soften it so that the plow can penetrate half an inch or so deeper every year. By plowing this for several years, the surface layer will become deeper, and the clay that is turned up can be mixed with the surface sod that it came from originally. This will be highly beneficial to crop production since it adds to the base exchange capacity of the surface sod. The TNT plow should be more popular with growers on sandy sods. It breaks up the subsoil without turning up much clay on top of it. But this plow should be used in combination with a good liming program. The use of a subsoiler may be necessary in some cases. We had a bad spot in one of our fields where the TNT could not penetrate. We used the subsoiler first, and then were able to break the subsoil with the TNT plow. It makes our farming practice more efficient. It is possible to make money with low yields at high prices, but high prices mean reduced consumption. Low yields at low prices lose money for the grower. Too many of our growers think that they can't make money on 200 acres. They need more land to get them out of the red. Some of our growers may think this is a ridiculous statement on my part, but too often one hears the statement made, "I don't have enough land to make money." Prices also come in for much discussion. I once heard a grower say, "We have to get together and set minimum prices." His yields were low and he was losing money. I convinced him that he must increase his yield by putting on enough lime to satisfy the needs of the soil. His yields increased 500%. Several years later, I asked him whether he still thought there should be a minimum price on crops. He said, "No, with production I can give the stuff away and still pay the bills." The old saying, "Nothing tried, nothing gained," should be printed on a card, framed and hung on the back door where it may be seen every time a person walks out in his yard. If we don't try something new, we never learn. People who have seemingly good reasons get in a rut. It's easier to do things the same way year after year than to try something different. We make progress by trying new things. This is the way civilization has come about. Just remember this, the largest yield has not been produced. There is always room for betterment. Perhaps these practices won't work on your farm, but you won't know until you try them. The minute a person says, "That won't work," he has dug his rut a little deeper, and finally gets in so deep he can't see over the edge. Then his usefulness to society and to himself is lost. A grower told me he would never use another ton of lime on his farm. I asked him why not. He pointed to a field and said, "I put a ton to the acre on that field and could see no difference." I said, "Did you leave a strip without lime?" "No." "Then how do you know it didn't do any good?" He didn't have a good answer. We looked at the field, dug up some of the sod. I told him that his particular sod probably should have 7 or 8 tons of lime per acre before he could get real results from it. From the way he looked at me, I know he figured I was out of my mind. I asked him if he would put strips of lime across the field, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 tons, to prove to him that I wasn't what he thought I was. He said he wouldn't waste his time because it wouldn't work. Well, we have too many people in agriculture who think that they know all the answers and remain in a rut because of their attitude. And yet farmers have tried this simple experiment and found they could double their 65 bushel yields. We have tremendous possibilities for increasing our yields by deepening our sods, farming the second and third farms that we own, and if we will only unlock that door that will make it possible for our crops to feed in those lower reaches. On our acid coastal plain soil, the key that will open the door is lime, enough lime to satisfy the needs of that particular sod. And when we once accomplish that, we will not only increase our yields per pound of fertilizer used, but we will produce food that will nourish us better and make us a happier people. So I wonder whether we actually have advanced in our knowledge beyond what the Indian knew when he buried a fish under each hill of corn. The soil testers can help you, but they are not the means to profitable yields, even in the hands of trained soil chemists. Foliar tests have been discussed for many years. Here again, one wonders what people are trying to do. There is no question but that we are equipped with methods for running foliar tests, but for what purpose? We certainly have to superimpose our foliar tests on soil tests. We would like to test plants to find out what we should feed them to grow bigger yields. But do we know how to interpret our data? We have hard or soft plants, or succulent and non-succulent plants. If we are dealing with fruit crops, what is our standard of excellence? We can tell by looking at a plant whether it is hard or soft. We have certain symptoms which most plant scientists recognize or can find out about. But to know what causes these symptoms may be more tricky. I have seen what appeared to be phosphorus deficiency corrected with limestone, and also by a rise in temperature. I have seen what appeared to be potash deficiency corrected by a broadcast application of limestone, and also by a heavy rain. This throws the whole problem back to the soil. A friend of mine found out that stalks of corn grown with certain treatments were sweet, while others were sour. Too few of us have paid much attention to the succulence of the crop and crop yields. The condition of the plant has much to do with the yield. The thing that causes oats to lodge also reduces their yield. A hard plant is high in starch, high in proteins, and very low in amino acids. A succulent plant is low in starch, low in proteins, but high in amino acids. Amino acids are bitter. Such a plant does not yield a good crop, nor does it produce good quality. Feeding tests have shown this to be true. To test this plant for nitrate or ammonia may not be much help, because we have no practical way of reducing this succulence. There are too many questions for which we have no answers. If we have a hard plant that isn't growing fast enough, we know it has a surplus of starch and needs more nitrogen. Then the question is whether we have nitrogen or oxygen in the soil. If there seem to be enough nitrogen in the soil, perhaps the plant can't assimilate the nitrogen because of a lack of calcium in the soil. Perhaps we have lice on the roots. Perhaps we have some other toxic materials affecting the roots. Foliar tests under these conditions are primarily of academic interests. My candid opinion is that if we pay more attention to the degree of calcium saturation of the base exchange complex, we will have very little need for foliar tests, unless we are interested in the level of nutrients for academic reasons.
Thanks for listening, everyone, to this episode of The Solution. If you'd like to learn more about the Growers Program or anything you heard in this podcast, visit our website at growersmineral.com. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Thanks. We'll see you guys in the next episode.